I'm pleased to introduce our panelists today. We've got a really esteemed group of panelists to talk about this new twin digital and green transition. First, we'll be joined by Cécile Huyt, who's the head of robotics and AI innovation excellence for the European Commission. David Jensen, coordinator for the Digital Transformation Task Force for the UN Environment Program. Eva Meidel, member of the European Parliament and president of the European Movement International. And Judith Amont, who's the product owner for WWF's Forest Foresight project. So the green and digital transitions are really at the core of what establishes funding, sources, how these funds are utilized, and the anticipated impacts of projects. As I come over and join you, I'd like to first start with Cécile and ask each of you, what does the twin digital and green transition mean to you?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So for me, it looks like an old couple. They need each other to proceed and progress. So if we want to reach the Green Deal objective, we need to use any tool possible, and AI has a great potential. We see from a Nature paper 2 years ago that the potential of AI to help on the SDG and environment is 85%. It has, though, a negative effect. So we need also a potential negative effect. So we have to work as well to make sure that when we develop and use and deploy AI, we also take care of making it less energy consuming. So we have to deal one with each other and keep in mind the other, support each other to progress on these two fronts.
David, how about for you?
Sure, thanks. We heard this morning that digital transformation is fundamentally disrupting most economic sectors. It's fundamentally changing the very systems of governance, social interaction. It's really having a dramatic effect on the entire planet. And this could either be the biggest single opportunity for sustainability in the history of human civilization, or it could be the biggest risk. And so what we really want to see with these two trends coming together is sustainability being embedded directly into the digital transformation process itself. Sustainability has to become kind of a default of digital transformation, and we have to start using these technologies to really accelerate sustainability, because if we don't, the technologies will likely start accelerating everything that's already causing climate change and biodiversity loss and pollution. So fundamentally, it's about embedding sustainability directly into our technologies and directly as an outcome of digital transformation.
Eva, would love to hear from you as a member of parliament. What do the twin transitions mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I represent more the policy side, so one could say it's a little bit more boring, perhaps, our perspective. But I would maybe try to make it more fun by saying that I believe I'm one of those members of parliament that are tech optimists. In the same time, that doesn't mean I'm not a tech realist, but I would like to put my hat as a tech optimist, especially when we talk about this particular subject. Because very often in the European Parliament, we're more focused on the issues that come by, technology companies, rather than the opportunities that new and emerging technologies can bring to make that transition more smooth. Because the way I see it from, where I sit, I think this is our chance to make this new industrial revolution that we are currently living in, to make it on the right side of history in a way. And one of the reasons why in the European Parliament I'm very often misunderstood perhaps is because I say, well, there cannot be any green transition without making sure we first of all have very ambitious goals where technologically we want to get. So for me, that's the important debate that underpins how do we get the green goals by making sure we actually have very important tech goals. And I say that because I think the only way to get to the green goals is by making sure that we invest in clean tech technologies that are able to bring us to these important goals.
Yeah, great points. And it's great to actually have a practitioner with us of some of those technologies really working at the intersection of the twin digital and green transition. Judith, what about for you? What does the twin transition mean to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's for me, it's really harnessing. There's a lot been said already. Harnessing technology to drive the world to a more sustainable future. And from a conservation perspective, I work for the World Wildlife Fund. There's a lot of possibilities now with remote sensors, either in space or remotely put in forest, camera traps, audio sensors to gather acoustic samples of what kind of biodiversity is out there. There's a lot of efficiency gains there. Instead of going into the field and doing these tedious field surveys listing what birds you see, there's a huge advancement for us in sort of efficiency in gathering the data that ultimately underpins our work. We need to know what biodiversity is out there in order to protect it.
Great, and I can't wait to deep dive a little bit more later on exactly how WWF is using AI for forestry protection. Really interesting application of AI. Cecile, to you for a moment. The Green Deal, as we talked about, is really among one of the top priorities for the Commission at the moment, but at the same time, the EU AI Act is also under discussion. Can you tell us a little bit about the coordinated plan on AI and maybe about some of the mechanisms that are being put into place to facilitate public-private partnerships and what the outcomes of those partnerships might look like?
Indeed, yeah. Indeed, that's a big priority for us to make sure that AI is there for good and on all dimensions. And of course, the environmental dimension is key because we have also this Green Deal objective and we want to deploy all the tools we have for that. For sure, we want to have an AI which is respecting our value, respecting people, and respecting the environment. What we do in terms of instrument we're deploying, we work with the member states in the context what we call the coordinated plan on AI, where we want to join forces on the different efforts done at member states level and at the Commission to make sure that we progress faster on reaching this objective of an AI made in Europe which respects our value and try also to promote this approach to the world. So in the context of that coordinated plan with the member states, we have a number of activities from supporting data, supporting cloud-to-edge infrastructure, supporting from basic research to deployment, skills as well, international dimension to promote ethical and respectful AI. And finally, we have a number of prioritized topics, strategic topics we want to address, and of course, environmental dimension is one of them. What do we do more concretely in that dimension? We also have a funding program in research, development, deployment of digital technologies. And in that context, we for sure continue to do basic research. And in that context, we have a track of research for more frugal AI, using less resource, less data to be without neglecting the robustness, the accuracy of systems. So that's one track of research. Another one is to use AI data and robotics for the purpose of the Green Deal, contributing to that. So we have a number of different opportunities, be it in the context of manufacturing application, where you want to foster circular economy, also cleaning, and AI is the perfect tool for optimization. So any kind of optimization of resources to minimize waste is also part of the program we are funding in research and development. So we have these different tracks of research, and then we have now a new program called the Digital Europe program, where we want to bring all these results from research to deployment. This is something rather new. We did not do that in the past, and this was really something missing to really transfer. And we have different types of activities there, and one of them is, for instance, what we call testing experimentation facilities that we are going to launch soon. The call is open, and what we want to do is really to test these technologies coming from the lab in a real environment. And we have selected 4 application sectors, and out of the 4, 3 of them are directly linked to the Green Deal. We have in agri-food, for instance, and there we know that using precision farming will help to seriously decrease the use of pesticides. So there are many contributions possible to also contribute to the Green Deal. We have also a testing experimentation facility for smart cities and community. Of course, there again, buildings optimization, energy optimization, any resource optimization, mobility will also have a big impact. So it's important to test these technologies in real environment before full deployment, given also the level of autonomy you're bringing those systems. And then the other one is linked to manufacturing, and this is where you can also have this, push the circular economy. Now, regarding the public-private partnership we have. So we have a public-private partnership in AI, data, and robotics, and the goal is to work with the whole community, the stakeholders from researcher to industry, to define a strategy for research, innovation, and deployment in the context of the Horizon Europe program. So we work with them to define the priorities, so they define the strategy, and this is for us a tool to define the priorities or funding. So that's the way we work with the community, and it should also help to develop this ecosystem of excellence we call around AI. And one of the it's called ADRA, this PPP, public-private partnership, and one of their goals is, of course, to have an AI which foster the deployment of application contributing to the Green Deal. So the environmental dimension is at all level of our programs and interaction with the community.
Well, it sounds like the partnerships are really important to help to drive strategy. You've also got some really interesting use cases around buildings, agriculture, and so on. Could you talk a little bit about the value of these types of partnerships in terms of policy development or actually building sustainable, sort of a sustainable future, sort of beyond these use cases? What sort of value is coming out of the partnerships beyond the obvious?
Yeah, for us, it's also through these programs, it's an access to the real community. So giving feedback about what's going on in the real field, what are the concerns of the company, what are the concerns of the researcher, what are the main technology block we have and we need to address. So this is part of the whole strategy, which then can feed back in, for instance, the need for more standards, the need for more skills, the need for what are also the acceptance issue we have. What kind of, it's very important also to know how to frame the message. If we know what are the hurdles to deploy, what are the challenges for the population to accept this technology, we need to understand what the concerns are in order to give the right information, not lying to people, giving a realistic information about what this technology is about. Because, yeah, they see sci-fi movie and scary movie, but the practice is really far from that. So we have really to be realistic, give the right estimate of the potential contribution and not ignore the risk. So this is why we have the AI Act, for instance, to protect, make sure that the AI we develop is not presenting risk to the population.
Super interesting implementations. It'll be really interesting to see what the outcomes are. David, to you for a second. You've really been at the epicenter of the launch of the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability. As part of the Secretary General's roadmap on digital cooperation, can you tell us a little bit more about the Coalition, its objectives, and its actions?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, just to say that the Secretary General is very much interested in this relationship between digital transformation and the Sustainable Development Goals. How do they come together? And he's very, very keen to establish this kind of partnerships, right? Bringing the public sector together with the private sector, with civil society, academia. So this digital cooperation roadmap was an initial attempt to lay out some of these big digital transformation issues and how they intersect with sustainability. Now, the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability is a follow-up process, and this is all about kind of defining this digital twin transition we talked about at the start. How does digital transformation and environmental sustainability come together? So we're trying to create a North Star in terms of a big vision and then an action plan and a roadmap to get there. So right now, the coalition is around 1,000 people. It's, as I said, public sector, private sector, civil society, academia. We've been working for about a year to develop this action plan, and we're trying to define kind of 3 core goals. First and foremost, what's the enabling environment? What are the standards, the regulations, the policies that can bring these 2 sectors together? What's the training required? How do they come together in a real way? So number 1 is the enabling environment. Number 2 is, well, what do we have to mitigate in terms of the environmental impacts of digital technology? So how do we reduce energy and emissions, waste, misinformation, digital divide, digital rights? How do we address kind of the negative side of the equation? And then the third is all about innovation, right? How do we catalyze innovation for sustainability? So how do we build digital twins of the planet? How do we catalyze the circular economy? How do we enable sustainable consumption? How do we enable better governance? So these are the core 3 pillars: enable, mitigate, innovate, that we're trying to bring together. But it goes beyond that. That's kind of the action framework. And then we're trying to define 10 impact initiatives where public actors and private actors can come together and actually catalyze transformative change in one of those areas I talked about. So how do we work with Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and others to sort of bring sustainability into the cloud, for example? Or how do we work on global training programs about digital sustainability? So how do we come together and actually take substantive transformative impact as coalitions of actors? So that's what the framework is trying to do. We're trying to launch it at Stockholm Plus 50 in June. And then we're basically trying to launch and get political support for these 10 impact initiatives going forward. So that's the coalition, that's the big idea, and we'd welcome anybody's participation in it. Thanks.
I'd love just for a moment, just to kind of test the audience. You've mentioned the concept of the Sustainable Development Goals. I know we've got mostly a tech audience here. How many of you are familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, the 17 goals that the UN has established? Show of hands for those that have heard of the SDGs.
And how about the Paris Agreement?
The Paris Agreement.
Even less.
A few more.
Oh, a few more. Okay.
So it's sort of an interesting test of the level of familiarity with some of these concepts.
Can I chip on that one?
Yeah, please.
I mean, I think it's great that you asked the question, but it's okay if society is not necessarily familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. And you might not agree with me, but I tell you why. I've done that test actually with CEOs of companies in the financial sector and other smaller or medium-sized companies. It's okay, you're focused on your own, thing that you're doing, that you're developing, that you're creating. I think it's extremely important that political leaders actually do know the goals, do understand them, and not just sign a piece of paper and say, yeah, maybe we're going to aim to get there. And then they proactively work with industry, with civil society, and no responsible actors to get us there, because then society would simply live better, would produce better, would be more sustainable as a whole. So I think it was a great test. But in defense of everyone who hasn't heard of those, I think it's up to the people that represent you and political leaders and also societal leaders in a way to be out there and to work on achieving those goals, because they're not just on a piece of paper. We need to get there, and some are getting faster compared to others.
That's a super great point. What would be interesting too is if folks were to go back and familiarize themselves with the 17 goals, they would probably realize that their day-to-day activities, the work that they're doing within the organizations they're involved in, are likely having significant impact to one or more of those particular goals. So that's where things get really exciting. David, could you talk to us a little bit about incentives? I mean, there's obviously high levels of aspiration, high-level goals. What about the incentives that need to be potentially put in place to promote these interactions and promote sustainability more broadly?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think there's a couple of different incentives. I mean, with respect to the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability, we're trying to connect like-minded actors that have a shared interest in a similar outcome, right? So we're kind of the glue that brings companies together and helps companies come together and kind of co-solve a specific issue. So, for example, one of the issues we're working on is called the Carbon Call, and it's working primarily with the private sector exactly on this question of how do you measure scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, how do you aggregate it, and how do you ensure kind of digital standards around it. And that's a common challenge that many companies are facing. So by bringing them together, we can kind of co-solve the problem and bring down the costs and share the costs of that problem. So that's one example. But I think in terms of, as you talked about incentives, the two incentives that I think are really, really important from a policy perspective, and this is already happening, but disclosure, mandatory disclosure of your carbon performance as a company, in a digital, machine-readable format is essential. And I think that the second incentive that's coming online, and you can talk more about this, is the concept of a digital product passport. The idea that every product in the economy should have kind of a digital information pod around it, where the entire life cycle of that product, from the origin of it to the disposal of it, can be contained in a digital format. And all of the performance information and life cycle information can be inside that digital product passport. I think that would create an incredible incentive, an incredible transparency in terms of, as I said, climate information, carbon footprint, environmental footprint. But the data could then be used by companies for procurement purposes, by governments for regulatory purposes, and by consumers, really importantly, to select and compare products that have better environmental or climate performance. So those are some examples of incentives that we're working with.
Great, thank you. Eva, as a member of the European Parliament, you once said, we can't achieve the ambitious green goals without tech. You did say that, right?
I even kind of said it in my opening statement today, yeah. So I like to repeat that often. It's kind of something that I try to hammer in within the European Parliament, because maybe many of you are not familiar, but of course one of the main goals of the European Commission is to have these very ambitious goals by 2025, by 2030, by 2050. And I think we are all aware we would like to get there, but I do believe that if we do not develop technologies that can help us find those groundbreaking and breakthrough innovation, it would be just very difficult with the existing technologies we have in the energy sector to be able to get there. So that's why I think investing more in technological breakthrough in the area of sustainability is essential.
You also speak about sort of this intersectionality between society, politics, economics, environment, and so on. And I heard one of your talks where you talked about or advocated for the use of AI and becoming a competitive edge for small and medium-sized enterprises and to help advance sustainable innovation. How are policy discussions in Parliament, do you feel, facilitating the twin transition? Is it something that's really at the core of these discussions, and how is it facilitating the transition?
I mean, thank you for this question. Maybe it will allow me to elaborate a little bit about the work in the European Parliament and what I particularly do. So in Parliament, for many of you, because we could ask also how many of you are familiar with the policies of the European Parliament, and that would be even less people. So and that's okay. I sit in two committees, and this is where we do most of this legislative work that turns into laws and hopefully facilitates your businesses and your lives. As well. So one of them is the Industry, Research and Innovation Committee. So a lot of the things we are talking today about takes place in that committee. And the other one is the Economic and Monetary Affairs. And what I try to do in my work basically is to particularly make these rules and actions for disruptive innovation in these two committees. A way to help me do that is a special grouping that I put forward in the European Parliament called AI for Sustainability. And initially, I can't say I had resistance about it, but people were not understanding why this grouping will be important. And the idea is that, you know, technology is still widely misunderstood and not entirely grasped and understood within policymakers. It's more about let's put rules rather than how do we facilitate innovation. And of course, colleagues might disagree, but I think it's important to have rules and to have very clear rules, but it's also more important to give the opportunity and the freedoms for companies to innovate and to get to this breakthrough innovation that I mentioned earlier. So speaking of this balance that they try to find, whether it's legislation related to the AI Act or it's legislation related to energy files, I try to underpin this disruptive innovation through making suggestions in these reports that could get us there in a sustainable development way while using technologies. And it's not often easy, of course, because it's not like we have the solution. It's more folks like you that come up with the disruptive solutions, but we need to give you the opportunity, the field where you could do that. And this is why, particularly when it comes to the AI legislation, we give very concrete, so to say, ways of how to do it in a competitive, sustainable way. And that's another thing I want to introduce, but I'll speak about it in a little bit. So we are currently working on how to find some rules so that AI and the people that work on AI solutions have some rules, so to say. Rules that would make sure that people that will use the data that has been, fed into the AI feel more confident that there is some sort of, a value-based system that surrounds the way AI is being developed. But I have 3 things that I've put forward that I think are good for the discussion we're having today. First of all, I think this regulation should make sure to provide a predictable environment for low-risk industrial solutions. So the way we divide AI and its development is whether it's used for high-risk solutions, be it health or others, or for low-risk solutions, such as in certain industries and factories, and so on and so forth. We don't want to burden the business that creates these low-risk industrial solutions with too many regulations. And like this, we're going to leave a big part of the business be able to explore, be able to test, and hopefully be able to create. So hopefully Europe will be also a place where some of these groundbreaking AI solutions will be found. The second area where we are very much trying to put an emphasis and encourage is measures to support innovation, particularly for startups and SMEs. So it's not just about the big companies that provide solutions. Yes, they're very important because very often they're the ones that provide the solutions for SMEs and startups. But we have a thriving ecosystem of SMEs across Europe, and many of them, don't need to be considered to have these big obligations that and rules-based system that we might have for more, advanced companies. We want to make sure that these smaller players have a big role to play in helping achieve this green transition, that they come across as disruptors, that they come across as creators, and overall entrepreneurs, which we can support with resources, but also tools and guidelines. So in this legislation, we try to include this, and also a concept which maybe some of you are familiar and others not, this sandboxing principle. We want to give the opportunity to small and medium enterprises and startups to test in a secure environment everything they want to probably one day bring to the market. And we have put certain rules to enable member states to give that possibilities for companies. And the last thing, which it's important, again, within the remit of this discussion, we want to make sure that this legislation on AI is future-proof by exactly providing linkages to the green transition and to the possible changes that we actually constantly have in the industry, in the technology, but also in the power and the way AI is developed and the way it works. So we are trying to think more critically about requirements on how long we should be be storing data in data centers, for example, because one of the topics that I said where I'm often misunderstood, and in the European Parliament, we're very often just focused on what's the negative impact in terms of energy of data centers. But we don't talk about the opportunities that AI can give us and the tools AI can give us to actually help those data centers to be more sustainable. And this is why we think by future-proofing this legislation, thinking with our green glasses on, so to say, it would make a lot of sense for companies that are in that sector. And if you allow me just very briefly, because your question was very, very broad, I think there's one important point, and I briefly touched upon it, and it's called the so-called buzzword. Here in the Brussels bubble, we have a lot of buzzwords: level playing fields, digital sovereignty, and so on and so forth. And very often people coming from outside say, okay, what do you imply with this? So let me give you another buzzword that fits this discussion, and this is competitive sustainability. And the reason why I introduce competitive sustainability is because I think this is the ability the economy, companies, and industries have to, face their international competitors in the long work. What we want to make sure while, using this term is that we embed this particular innovation indicators into our thinking about the way the economy develops, about the way the green transition develops. And it's a way for us to shift our thinking about what it means to be globally competitive. And I think really given our commitment on the important climate goals, I think the European Union can have an advantage in making sure our economy is truly competitive in a sustainable way. And so I would like us to, more often when we legislate, because that's my role here on this panel, we are legislators, to think about the economy in this particular way. So not just speaking about competitiveness or sustainability, but seeing these two together.
Yep. That's great. You mentioned a bit about misunderstandings. Would love to come back to you in a second if we have time, just to understand whether or not you feel like there are misperceptions about the role of Parliament in digital transformation and the acceleration of the use of technologies. Would love to jump over to Judith for a bit. I'm so interested in this technology. It sounds really, really cool. Tell us about your job, what you do, how you use AI to save the trees.
Thanks. Yeah. So Forest Foresight. So there's a few systems in the world that use satellites to observe forests, and a few systems that then produce alerts based on the last 10 days of observations and that's near real-time monitoring of forests. But even 10 days after the fact, the trees are gone. So the carbon is lost, the land is destructed. And so we saw a gap that there's also sort of long-term, 1 year in advance, which countries have higher risk of deforestation. And there's a gap between that sort of 1 year predictive work for a large spatial scales and that near real-time monitoring work. And so that's where Forest Foresight comes in, trying to predict deforestation based on what happened in the recent past, where are areas at higher risk of deforestation. And so the input data for the system is mainly Sentinel-1 radar satellite imagery. That comes in, the satellite orbit is about 6 days. So every 6 days you get a new observation. It's radar-based, so you're not, there's no issues with cloud cover. Clouds or not, you get an input data. And then relative to a baseline forest mask in different countries, we get every 6 days, is the forest still there or is there a gap now? And then from those labeled satellite images that come in, we harvest them every month. We have an archive of about 2-3 years for each of the landscapes we work in. We then learn what went on in the sort of 6 months right before new patches of forest opened up. And we calculate various spatial features from that labeled satellite imagery, usually geospatial features, the spatial aggregation of forest patches, how much edge is there to a forest, how many patches, what is the spatial heterogeneity of the forest. And then we couple that with other geospatial data sets. Roads, distance to roads is a great predictor of deforestation risk. In certain landscapes that are peat forests, canal development is a precursor to deforestation, because first you have to drain the land to bring your heavy machinery in, and so those canals are dug a couple months before the main patches are destroyed. And so you see that on a satellite image. The model predicts this area is now at higher risk, and the crews can send their field crews in. So these models, we run them every month after we harvest the new data, and they generate predictions that are validated over a 6-month period. Currently, our user accuracy sits at about 70 to 80%. We're trying to get that as good as possible, getting more data in for different landscapes. And then they're published on a web-based dashboard where the WWF offices in our implementing landscapes, so that's at the moment in Suriname, in the Amazon, in Gabon, Central Africa, Malaysia, and Indonesia, both Borneo. The WWF teams there coordinate with local stakeholders, land managing stakeholders, so that's usually the Ministry of Forestry, the Ministry of Mining, in some landscapes the Ministry of Agriculture, wanting to see whether new palm oil plantations are respecting these government stakeholders are seeing immense value to not have to go into the field for every investigation, but being able to judge where can we more efficiently send our field crews to. And we're even now seeing a bit of sort of the effect of sending crews even to where the deforestation is legal, because in a lot of these landscapes, a lot of deforestation is legal. There are forest concessions for timber, for palm oil, even for mining in Gabon, for instance. But just by going to these areas where it is legal, where they have a permit, just them knowing that now we're watching, the government can see from space, from their desktops, what is happening in the ground. That's revolutionary. That already has an impact on keeping the deforestation to where it is legal, because they now realize that it's not unseen anymore. And this is a really big change, because a lot of these forests are incredibly dense. They're hard to traverse. It takes a lot of ground crew resources to travel across them. And before Forest Foresight, they go based off of hearsay. In a village, we heard that something might happen, and they travel for 3 days to get somewhere based on that information. So now they have the predictive information from satellites. It hugely makes their work just more efficient.
What about interaction with enforcement? Does analysis of the data or the insights give you a window for potential intervention in an illegal situation? I mean, I know, illegal logging, there could be some dangerous characters behind some of it in some of these places. Do you have any backward-looking data to understand, hey, we were involved in a potential intervention where we protected an area, and you're involved in kind of the post-mortem law enforcement aspect of it?
Yeah, it's interesting. So law enforcement really is only one of the many types of interventions that might happen. So in the reviews of the evaluations of the implementations that are currently live, there's this really variety of different interventions that were done. The interesting cases from just a community developing a community garden for local harvesting. They made a collaborative new land use plan. Okay, well, let's keep the garden to this area because that forest is really important for biodiversity. They found that a legal forest concession had access roads leading into their concession, and that was legal, but they were making their roads twice as wide as was legal. And so now the enforcement came in and said, no, this is the dimension of roads. and basically saving half the trees of those roads. Also, and at times there is law enforcement involved. So when it's concerning national parks, usually any type of deforestation is illegal, and that's a very clear use case for us. So in Gabon, they found illegal gold miners in a national park. But that kind of is, WWF has implemented this system, and the local WWF offices bring together the local stakeholders, so the government officials, but it's really up to them to decide what type of intervention is effective or is appropriate for a different land use type in a different region. And sometimes that's law enforcement when it is concerning a national park, and sometimes it's really just discussing with concession holders, opening up the discussion about maybe the boundaries weren't quite clear enough, or reestablishing which parts of a concession should really stay, because there's particularly old growth forest there that is really important. So there's this sort of wide array of interventions that could be done, and WWF is sort of bringing together the stakeholders and enabling them, providing them with the information, but then it's also up to these the authorities essentially to decide what's best for the place. Yeah.
So interesting. Within organizations, often digital transformation there are challenges around people more than the technology itself. I'm wondering, in the NGO community, in your case in particular, are there challenges to implementation? What if people are really interested in technology? How do they get a hold of it? How do they use it? What sort of obstacles do you come across?
Yeah, and in our case, there's another obstacle, which is we're dealing with countries that aren't very advanced in sort of onboarding with technologies. I recently came back from Central Africa on last Friday, visiting the stakeholders in the field, and Gabon has a national space agency, and they collate the satellite imagery for the whole Central African region, and they're amazingly capable at remote sensing and GIS applications. They're not quite on sort of data science, machine learning capabilities yet, but they're really keen. So these are the users of our system, and they're really excited to get going. But then there's also, they're not in charge of getting this system adopted throughout the country. These are more sort of levels up in the policy and decision-making hierarchy. And so you have to, and in other countries, we sometimes have had people higher up in the hierarchies very interested in the technology, really wanting to onboard, but then it didn't land quite through the end users, because they know their area, and they do their field patrols in a certain way, and they've always done it, and they know what's best. And so it's really important to kind of interact across that hierarchy of people, and really involve as many people as possible, and train the trainers, and get the information out there. And for us now the challenge is really, we don't want to, we want to eventually hand over the ownership of these models also to these regions, and that's going to be our next challenge. How do we get this Gabonese space agency on board with really working with their own models, and when they have a new data layer from their National Institute of Cartography, they can swap it out, and they can test new hypotheses in their models, and so it's still going to be an interesting path in how to shape this project going forward.
Yeah, great technology. Really cool to see it actually implemented on the ground. Well, we've got about 1 minute for each of you now for last thoughts. So about 30 seconds for last thoughts. Then would love to hear too your soundbite, your tweet, if you were. What is your message to organizations looking to harness the power of AI to contribute to the twin transition of both green and digital? Why don't we start with you, Cecile? Any high-level thoughts and a tweet to leave the audience with?
I would say to innovators, you are our chance for a change. And so help us reaching these goals to help the society and help reaching these environmental sustainability of our society.
Excellent. David, how about you?
One thing, which is, if you're looking for a cloud provider, AWS is really cool because it's got a really interesting carbon footprint calculator now. And I would say definitely, if you're looking for those kind of services, look for a cloud provider that offers that kind of tool. Second of all, I would say, it's all about the business model. That's the key to everything, is business model, business model, business model. And make sure that business model is sustainable and can be sustainable when it scales. So I think that's second. And the third thing, definitely start connecting to these kind of digital innovation ecosystems. Like, think about the ecosystem you're contributing to, the digital public goods you're generating, and the business model that underpins all of that. So, be my advice.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I would
Ava, how
keep
about you?
it as short as a tweet, probably. So I would just say, just do it or make it happen. But we would be there to support you with the tools, with the concrete, framework in terms of legislation or support. That could be financial support. That could also be in terms of certain resources or guidance. So yeah, dare to do it, because I agree, we need your ideas to achieve those goals. Simple.
Excellent. And Judith, how about you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about something that hasn't been mentioned in this session at least, and we found incredibly important, is focus on the interpretability of our AI. And our CEO, Kirsten, mentioned it briefly, that for us, the predictions of deforestation, you need to know with whom you're going to communicate, whether it's driven by mining or forestry, or whether it's close to a road. So knowing, just giving your predictions out is not enough. They need to know why was an area at risk, and do not think lightly about interpretability of your AI.
Yeah, the democratization of data. Please join me in thanking this just exceptional panel. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon.